I wanted to play you just one thing and then talk about some stories that's related to it. Now, what I have here is I have Sylvia. She's telling me a story that was very impactful for her life.
Yes.
She was in the classroom and there was an incident, and it. Excuse me for a second. There we go. Yeah. And I just think she's a lovely lady. I know she would be pretty tough opponent if you're ever up against her on an issue. She's very tenacious.
Yes.
But I think she's kind of cool. I think this is it.
Things. Well, I actually been to school here at Tweedsmuir. My parents were like vagabonds, and we never ended up in one school for very long because they had a summer business on Lake Nosbonsing. So in the fall, pack up. Dad could get a job in Toronto or North Bay, wherever. We'd move there for so many months, then back, so on. So we had kind of a disruptive growing up cycle. But in high school, the high school sweetheart who eventually became my husband, we were in, I guess, grade 10 or 11. And Mr. Brown was, I think he was vice principal, but he was a former major or something in the military, and he used to like to yell and lord and bully people. Anyway, I had a desk right in front of Mr. Brown, was where I sat. And I loved the man. He taught math, and I just loved math. And I would work ahead in the book. I just had such a quest for it. Anyway, one day, there's this fellow, Mr. Brown had ordered him to come up to the blackboard, and this kid was terrified, and Mr. Brown's yelling at him. Why can't, I can't remember geometry or whatever it was. Anyway, and he was getting so angry, finally, he whacked the kid in the head, bashed the kid's head up the chalkboard, and then said, "Get out of my class." So, of course, kid left, goes to the principal's office, phone rings, Mr. Brown's, "I'll be back in a few minutes." He has to leave. So he came back and he asked the class, he said, "Murray's down there in the principal's office." He said, "I hit him. Did anybody see me hit him?" Sylvia puts her hand up. There's a class of about 40 kids. Nobody saw this. And he said, "What did you see?" I said, "Well, Mr. Brown, you struck him hard enough that I saw chalk come out of the corners of that chalkboard." And he said, "Come here and show me." So I slapped the board, and sure enough, chalk filtered out. He said, "Thank you, Sylvia. I'm surprised nobody else noticed." I sat down, he goes back, and of course, nobody's. So he gets the kid in front of the class. He said, "Murray, will you accept my apologies?" He said, I didn't realize in my temper that I struck you, but Sylvia saw what happened." And he goes explaining this to the kid. And the kid, of course, yeah, he would accept it, and they shook hands and all this. Anyway, years go by. When my husband came back into my life, more than 37 years, 4 months and 19 days later, he said, "I learned that day." He said, "I never forgot. I never stood up and said, 'I saw what you did, Mr. Brown.'" And he said, "Sylvia, I learned a lesson." Do you know, Dave, that stuck with me. That if you know something isn't right, stand up and say something. Sometimes you get in trouble, but there's a right and wrong. And if nobody stands up.
I think you get the idea. It's very wild, the things that happen to us in youth that impact us and sort of shape us, right? And I know you were talking about one of your stories, and I wanted you to share it. Is not quite that way, but we were talking about it last on the weekend there. You remember which story?
Oh yeah, this happened in 1952. I actually, after I was speaking with you about it, I checked with my sister because I wanted to be sure what grade I was in. I was in grade 2 in Windsor, and we had 2 black kids in our class. And colored pencils were a new thing. And there was a boy, 2 boys in the class had a disagreement over who owned a set of colored pencils. One was a black boy and one was a white boy. I remember the black boy's name, and interestingly, I don't remember the white boy's name. The black boy's name was Jackie. And when he was explaining to the teacher, these are my colored pencils, and I marked them with my teeth marks. And he said, see, those are my teeth on those pencils. And it just happened that that day, when the 2 boys are arguing over who owned the pencils, another boy's father had come to pick him up for an appointment, and he happened to be a policeman, plainclothes policeman. And so this was a big deal. The teacher invited the policeman into the class and explained that he was a policeman and he didn't wear a uniform. And I immediately thought, oh, Dick Tracy. No, oh, he's Dick Tracy. Anyway, and he was even wearing a fedora. The things you remember, right? So the teacher decided to ask the police officer to solve the crime. Who was the rightful owner? So he took the 2 boys out in the hall, and we're all thinking, oh, he's going to solve the crime, and Dick Tracy's on the job. They come back in, the black boy's crying, Jackie. And the policeman says, Jackie has agreed to give the pencils to so-and-so. The policeman leaves, and Jackie's still crying, and he says, and I'm paraphrasing, those are my pencils. And Mr. So-and-so asked me to give them up because it would make things easy. Now, I don't remember that those were his exact words, but that was the gist of it. Like, don't cause trouble, just give the pencils up. So grade 2, how old was I? 8? 7?
Mm-hmm.
The injustice of that stuck with me all these. I'm 78 years old and I can still get mad over that.
Yeah.
It's not wild, eh?
Yeah, and I mean, I did nothing about it. I didn't say, wait a minute. I mean, looking back, you think, well, why didn't they just divide the pencils in half? Here, you get half, you get half. The wisdom of Solomon, right? Nobody had it that day.
Well, they were Jackie's pencils. He shouldn't have to give up any of them.
They were Jackie's pencils, and his teeth mark showed it.
Yeah, this is terrible. Mm-hmm. So the spotlight's on you. Do you have a story? Do you have a story from your youth as a child that was in your education days that, or even not in school, but something that was a social sort of situation that sort of defined what you thought of the world in some way? Was there any injustice? I'm putting you on the spot.
You are.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of back. I can say one thing that has is I think the first town hall meeting that we held, there were 2 or 3 ladies that did a presentation to say how North Bay is racist. And of course we're all going to say no. But those were from her perspective, what she has lived in her shoes. And we have to, acknowledge that. But what they did at the end, and I did meet with one lady after, but what they did at the end, they recommended a book. No, I'm not a racist. So I got the book and I read it. And for me, and what you were talking about, all these little subtle little things for women, that's what they were talking about all the time. But what we also, I realized is I'm not a racist. but I don't call it out when I see it. And that's almost as bad as being one. And we need to step up. And when we see something that's not right, I did call one up one day. When I used to teach at the Creative Sewing Festival, the biggest sewing festival, needle festival in North America. And one day I had volunteers, a nice lady, she was my staff, she's a volunteer. She's from Quebec originally, her husband was military, but she learned to speak English in Germany when she lived in Germany. So she sounds German, French speaking English. Anyway, that evening there was a dinner and the announcer decided to say a joke about a French-speaking an English person, or a French person speaking English. And the next person that came up to speak at the mic was from Quebec, from Montreal. It was a customer or somebody at the festival who had paid. So I didn't call it out on the shot there. I felt like leaving the room immediately, but when I apologized to my volunteer, she said, "It's okay, Johanne, I'm used to it." And that's what happens a lot of times. We're just used to it. To use someone else's culture and to laugh, to create a joke because of somebody else's position in life is not good. So I did write a letter after to the organizers making them realize that you just insulted. There was 200 ladies in that room that came from the Montreal area. You have lost all your Americans that used to come to these shows, and you've lost now 200. And if you wonder why next year there's less people at the show, this is why. I don't care how famous you are, but if you can laugh at your own personal attributes and create a joke with that, but don't use somebody else's. So that I found was very hurtful, and I've learned, I gotta call it out. I'm more sensitive to it, but to be able to step up and call it out on the spot, I gotta get faster at that. Yeah.
I'd agree to you with that in most events, but I'll stand up for comedians. I'll stand up for comedians' right to joke about anything, and there are lines that you can cross.
Yeah.
But I don't know if we need to limit it when it's a comedy-specific event. I don't like to have any constraints there. It's a matter of taste. You don't like it, you don't buy their stuff. If you go to that. But you're talking about a public event where people are there for a different purpose.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I totally agree.
He was the MC and that was it. He wasn't there to crack jokes.
Yeah, and as an MC, even if you are cracking jokes, you need to be sensitive to your audience. You got to read the room, right?
Yeah.
You got to know the room, and you're not there to insult people, right? So I've done both.
Yeah.
Hosting, MCing, and open mic and
insulting.
Well, yeah, no, I've done all kinds of jokes, but I don't necessarily think that it needs to be constrained to just making fun of my Ukrainians or my Germans or my Irish heritage people just because I have a little bit of blood in them. I'm, like I say, an equal opportunity type guy, but comedy and that type stand-up comedy is something I'd say that needs to be protected as far as its being ability to make everybody laugh. But if they're not laughing, you're not funny, right?
Right.
That's the difference. You can make fun of people's culture, perks, or quirks, or whatever, but you need to make it in a way that they can laugh at it too.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And there's some comedians that are really good at it. And they can make fun of any culture just because they're so good and skilled.